and I guarantee your bum will probably explode. Not in the explosion of you've had a bad takeaway and things aren't feeling too good, more the explosion in the fact that you're going to pack on some good contractile tissue being muscle. Back in business, back with some educational workout content for you that will hopefully help you improve your workouts regardless of what your goals may be. Today we're going to be talking about MDJ Fitness once again. Actually quite a good name to pop up on the channel because firstly, people actually seem to like her stuff and like me talking about her stuff. And secondly, it's a bit different because she trains in a manner that very much aligns with how I train, and I really like talking about that because I like lifting weights. And we're actually looking at why your glutes aren't growing. And personally, I know this was made 7 months ago before we obviously knew each other. She doesn't know who I am, I know who she is. But I feel like this was an indirect attack at me because I have a small bottom, and that's actually going to be quite relevant to the TFNL clothing that'll be coming out next month, so you'll see. Before we crack on with the video, I'm going to say very quickly, if at any point you actually just like this video, I would very much appreciate it if you did subscribe to the channel, because although it may not seem like a lot, it does help the channel out and it makes YouTube believe, whether it's true or not, that I'm somewhat worth tolerating. You and I both know it's probably a lie, but YouTube doesn't need to know that. Obviously, talk about glute movements here. The first one she's indicated is going to be the RDL. I know she's giving her tips regarding technical bits and bobs. I'm going to give mine, and I'm going to keep it simple because I don't like overloading people with information. Because if I tell you to do 1 to 3 things, you're probably going to do them well. If I tell you to do 100 things, you're going to forget to do none of them. When we look at a glute bias RDL, one thing you really want to note is the knee bend. A glute bias RDL will likely involve more knee bending because when the knees bend a bit more, that will allow you to drive those hips back a bit further, thus lengthening the glutes more, which is kind of what we're trying to do here. When it's glute bias, we want to shift as much emphasis over to the glutes, and again, taking them through a greater range of motion through further lengthening, so pushing those hips back further, is going to do just that. If the legs were straight, so less knee bend, it's going to be a bit more hamstring bias. So that's one tip. The second tip I want to give you is this, is when you're driving the weight down, keep it close to your body. The further and further that weight is away from you, the heavier and heavier it's going to be, and the harder and harder it's going to be for you to maintain position. I literally think about running the bar down my legs. When it gets further away, my back is going to round excessively. I'm going to be all over the place. So literally run the bar down your legs and kick your hips back. If the bar is shifty away, keep it close. If the hips aren't going back any further, your range of motion is done. More isn't always better. And again, with the knee bend earlier, avoid turning this into a conventional deadlift. You don't want to bend the knees excessively and touch the floor because quite frankly, that is just a conventional deadlift, which is not what we're looking to achieve here. Bulgarian split squat, we knew it was going to come up eventually. I'm not mad that it's come up from an effectiveness perspective. I'm mad that it's come up from a mental health perspective. And mental health is something that's very prevalent on this channel. And sometimes we have to identify what is hindering our health and what's helping our health. When it comes to split squats, they in fact actually do hinder my mental health because despite them being bloody effective, for whatever reason, despite my many years of training, they just don't get easier, and I just hate them because they hurt my soul, they hurt my feelings, and they hurt my life. So I don't do them anymore. Again, to make a split squat slightly more glute bias, we want to keep that front of shin more vertical. When there is more knee flexion, so more knee bending and more knee travel, the quads are going to be more involved. One of the hindrances with this movement is stability. So obviously she's holding dumbbells in both hands. Fine, you can do that. But if you want to make this potentially a little bit better and more stable, and when it comes to building muscle, we do want stability. It's pretty important because we don't want to be limited by us not having balance or stability. We want us to be limited by our muscles struggling and potentially even failing. What I would do is dumbbell in one hand, stick or something to support you in the other hand, and just use that stick as a support. Don't use it to yank yourself up, just use it to increase stability and then load up weight with the dumbbell in the other hand. Making a movement more stable will typically make it usually a bit better for hypertrophy because again, like I said, we do not want stability to be the limiting factor here. We want our muscles to be the limiting factor. So she's moving on to a B stance hip thrust. I think a regular hip thrust is good enough. Sure, if you want a B stance, you can, but in this case, I'd actually just say, let's keep it simple, regular hip thrust. And again, you'll notice a bit of a trend here, like we saw in the last movement. One of the big things you want to focus on there when looking at a hip thrust, vertical shins. When the knees are traveling forward or back too much, other muscles are getting involved. When the shins are more vertical, you know you're shifting as much emphasis as possible over to the glutes. Sure, the shins won't be vertical throughout the entire movement, the knees will travel back at some point, but again, you want the finishing position to be when the shins are vertical, and you want that to align with when you've locked out the rep. Another thing with this, which is a tip I want to give a lot of people really fall short on, is weight. So many people just don't go very heavy on this because, quite frankly, it either feels quite heavy on the hips, which it does, get a thicker pad, that pad probably isn't thick enough, or they can't be bothered to load the weight, in which case I'd say use a machine variation. Your body can't separate what's a machine and what's a free weight, it just knows about the range of motion it's going through and how that's being loaded. It does not know that you're using a barbell versus a machine. But what I would say is you can go much heavier on these than you typically expect, as long as you're reaching full lockout, because again, this being a shortened position dominant movement, what I would say is we really want to milk that shortened position, and to milk that shortened position, you have to lock out fully and really contract the glutes at the top, thinking about hitting your hips to the sky. But go heavier. However heavy you are going now, you can probably do more. Because I'll see some people load up, let's say, a plate either side and say, oh, this is too heavy, that's enough. You'd be surprised, you could probably go a lot heavier than that. Sure, it may not feel comfortable on the hips, but that's where you need to think about additional padding. The range of motion of this movement is very small, the glutes are very strong, you can probably go heavier than you think. And we know if you want to effectively build muscle, you have to train to, if not close to failure, and you've got to get stronger, more reps or more weight as often as you can. Probably not going to be every week, but you can always try. If you get a bloody strong hip thrust with consistent technique, so your technique is standardized, over time, if you put a couple of £100 on your hip thrust, I guarantee your bottom's going to grow. And if it doesn't grow, then is not possible. Very quickly, link down below. You know we've got a few things. You know we've got the link to apply to work with myself on a one-to-one coaching basis where I can coach you towards your goals, whatever they may be, online. So where you are in the world doesn't matter. It's global. You also got the link to the TFNL group coaching, which for less than $1 a day, you can follow a bloody good program written by me for either at-home use or at the gym use, which is fantastic. You've got options for both. And you can also talk to me on the message board there as well, which is great. You've also got the link to the TFNL workout guides, which for not a lot of money whatsoever, will tell you what to do, why to do it, and even show you how to do it too, which is bloody fantastic. And again, that's for the gym and for home as well. And again, there's also the upcoming nutrition guide, which is going to be releasing very soon. So if any of those tickle your pickle, have a gander down below and let me know your thoughts. So funnily enough, we're actually looking at a cable kickback variation, and I actually back it. So what I like to do is kind of this, we kick out slightly angled to bring in more of the glute med, which is a muscle of the glutes that's commonly neglected. And again, if we kick back more at 40 degrees or so, the glute med is going to get heavily recruited there, which we want. Actually did there, we don't want to hyperextend the lower back and arch too much. Don't worry about that. We want to keep a neutral spine and essentially remain stable. So making sure you're holding onto the machine with a hand or maybe even two. A couple of things you can do just to actually help with this is you'll notice how range of motion looks a bit tricky because that working leg or working foot, I should say, is sliding down and hitting the floor. If you stand on a plate or a step on the resting leg, that will then lift you off the floor a bit and help with that range of motion. A little hack you can do there, if you're finding your resting leg is getting very involved for whatever reason that may be, you can actually kneel on a bench as well. So if you kneel on a bench with its back pad up and use that for stability holding on, you can still go through the same range of motion with the working leg, but it just eliminates the fact that your resting leg is standing, you're now kneeling and a bit more potentially even stable and a bit more rested too. As a whole, I actually back all of these because when it comes to effective glute programming, I do look at a few things. I look at a shortened position dominant movement, which we've seen here being a hip thrust pattern. I look at a lengthened position dominant movement. So for example, an RDL. I look at a unilateral based movement. So for example, split squat or maybe even a unilateral leg press. And I also look at a kickback variation that's hopefully going to put a bit more emphasis on the glute med, being the cable kickback. From the base level of movement selected, this is bang on in my opinion. Sure, I may favour a regular hip thrust over a B-stance hip thrust, but the fundamental principle remains the same, is it's a really good thrusting, shortened position dominant movement. And sure, if you don't want to do a hip thrust, you can do a 45-degree back extension or something like that. I just get a bit wary with that, doing the back extension and the RDL. Sure, you can do it, and I do program it sometimes. You just have to be a bit wary of lower back fatigue. I know I've kind of expressed concern about a lot of this individual's volume, and we're not talking about that now because that's not being presented here. But when it comes to actual fundamental movements being selected for growing the glutes, if you do those 4 movements to a good standard regarding technique and get insanely strong at them, I mean, like, honestly, just get mad strong with those movements, I guarantee your bum's going to grow. Pair that with eating a slight caloric surplus, honestly, you'll be baffled. Do that consistently, run them to get as strong as possible without changing things every few weeks, just literally run those for months and months and months on end, get mad strong, eat a bit more food, and I guarantee your bum will probably explode. Not in the the explosion of you've had a bad takeaway and things aren't feeling too good, more the explosion in the fact that you're going to pack on some good contractile tissue being muscle. Honestly, generally, again, I've only seen a few of this individual's videos and I have expressed concern before, but probably one of the best videos of her, actually I'd actually say probably the best video of hers I've ever seen, and one of the best videos regarding glute movement selection, just because I agree with all of them. banging. Despite me having potentially a less than ideal opinion previously regarding a few things, this video has changed my mind, and I'm shockingly actually very impressed. And I think this is something that a lot of people could benefit from watching, and hopefully a combination of her tips with my tips will allow you to better train your glutes effectively, because that's probably why you're here, to get glute building advice from somebody who doesn't train their glutes effectively, because quite frankly, I can't be bothered and it's not a primary goal of mine. That's my excuse. Like with all my videos, this is just my opinion, and as always, I'd love to hear your opinion in the comment section below. So what is your favorite glute movement? Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my waffle about the bottom again, and thank you for tolerating the video.